Good morning, children. Today we are going to continue chapter number 9 of your ISC Plus 2 history book. The name of the chapter is Cold War, and today in this module we will discuss part 3 of the chapter. We will discuss in this module the actual course of the Cold War. Let's first discuss the objectives of the topic. The first objective is to discuss the origin of the Cold War, when this phenomena has come into existence. The second is to discuss the factors, the causes which led to the Cold War. The third is to discuss the incidents or the events which have taken place during Cold War phenomena. And lastly, we'll discuss how the Cold War ended. Students, in part 1 and part 2 of the Cold War video, I have already discussed with you the origin of the Cold War and the causes responsible for the Cold War. In this module, I am going to discuss with the courses or the events related to the Cold War. Let's first discuss the new terms of the topic. The first new word is Cold War. A Cold War is a state of conflict between nations that does not involve direct military action. It is intense economic, political, military and ideological rivalry between USA and USSR between 1945 to 1991. In short, a period of strained relationship between USA and USSR that existed from 1945, that is the end of the Second World War, till 1991 is called as Cold War. The next word is Allied Powers. The group of countries which won the Second World War comprised of England, France, Russia and America. The next word is Axis powers. The group of countries which were defeated in the Second World War, which comprised of Germany, Italy and Japan. The next word is NATO. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was formed in 1949 to provide collective security against the threat posed by Soviet Union. So NATO was the group of capitalist countries which have joined together against the threat of communism of Soviet Union. The next word is Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. On August 5, 1963, representatives of United States, Soviet Union and Great Britain signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited the testing of nuclear weapons in outer space, underwater or in the atmosphere. The next word is Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Treaty Organization, also known as Warsaw Pact, was a political and military alliance established on May 14, 1955 between the Soviet Union and several Eastern European countries, and it was the counteract of the NATO. The next word is satellite states. A satellite state is a country that is formally independent in the world but under heavy political, economic and military influence or control from other countries. For example, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, East Germany, Yugoslavia and Albania were the satellite states of USSR. That means their politics, their economy and their foreign policies were determined by USSR. The next word is Berlin Blockade. The Berlin Blockade was an attempt in 1948 by the Soviet Union to limit the ability of United States, Great Britain and France to travel to their sectors of Berlin, which lay within Russian-occupied East Germany. So we know that after the Second World War, the eastern part of Germany was with Soviet Union. So Soviet Union blocked the way of the western part of Germany to the eastern part of Germany, which was called as the Berlin Blockade. The next word is National Liberation Front. The Viet Cong, officially known as the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, was an armed communist political revolutionary organization in South Vietnam and Cambodia. And the purpose of this organization was that in South Vietnam, communist government should be set up. Now let us discuss the course of the Cold War, or what were the events that have happened during the period of Cold War. Students, the term Cold War had an American origin. The term was first used by Bernard Broch, who observed on 16th April 1947. Let us not be deceived today. We are in the midst of a Cold War. The term was then picked up by Walter Lippmann, who through his book on the Cold War popularized this term. Henceforth, the term Cold War used to describe the relations between Soviet Union and Western powers after the Second World War. Thus, Cold War was not a state of armed struggle, but a state in which the rivals, while maintaining their peacetime diplomatic relations, that means sending ambassadors to each other, continued still their hostility. Now, the first event that I would like to describe in the period of Cold War is the Berlin Blockade. The Berlin Blockade that took place on June 1948 to May 1949 by Russia brought the Cold War to its climax. At the Yalta and Potsdam Conference, it was agreed by the Allied powers, that is England, France, and Russia, along with America, that Germany and Berlin would be divided into 4 zones, each under America, Britain, France, and Russia. First three powers did their best to organize the economic and political recovery of their respective zones. Here, by first three powers, we mean to say England, France, and America had done a lot of good things for the zones which were under there. They have practically developed those areas. But Russia treated the zone as its satellite. Students, we had already discussed the meaning of satellite. A satellite state is an officially independent country that is strongly influenced or controlled by another country. So, Russia treated even the eastern part of Germany as the state who were under its control and drained its resources towards Russian development. In 1948, 3 zones merged together and formed a single economic unit. Here, 3 zones means the zones which were under the control of America, England, and France. With the help of Marshall Plan, the 3 zones had developed economically in contrast to the poverty of Russian zones. Students, in our previous module, we had already discussed Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan was a plan presented by America, where America asked the countries of the world to join the capitalist bloc, and in return, America would provide them economic as well as military assistance. Getting this help, all the 3 countries, along with America, England, and France, also developed their part, but the Russian zone was not developed. The Western powers wanted 4 zones, that is the American, British, French zone, which together made up of the western 2/3 of Germany, while the Soviet zone comprised the eastern 1/3, to be reunited again. So England, France, and America wanted that both the eastern and the western part of Germany should be reunited again, but Stalin, who was the president of USSR, wanted to keep the Russian zone separate because the reunited 3 zones would be a part of the Western Bloc, thus threatening Russia to a great extent. So, this proposal of the Western countries that the eastern and the western part of Germany should be joined together was rejected by the president of USSR, Stalin. As according to him, joining of all the 4 zones means that there would be capitalism and Russia has to bow down before the capitalist countries. June 1948, the Western powers introduced a new currency and ended price control in the respective zones and in West Berlin. But the Russian authority was not in a position to have 2 different currencies in the same city. Actually, Berlin city was situated within East Germany. Moreover, they were embarrassed by the contrast between the prosperity of West Berlin, which was under the control of America, and the poverty of surrounding areas, which was under the control of Soviet Union. So Russia then closed all the roads, rail, and canal links between the West Berlin and the East Germany. In this situation, the Western powers like America, England, and France decided to send food supply through aeroplanes to the blocked area for the next 10 months. In May 1949, Russia was compelled to withdraw the blockade. The result was that the relation of the Western powers with Russia reached the worst ever. So, the Berlin Blockade was actually the beginning of the period of the Cold War era. The West Bloc then decided to form the NATO. NATO means North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was formed in April 1949 for the coordination of their defense. It thus became clear that Germany would remain divided in future as Stalin did not accept the proposal of joining East and West Germany. The second important event during the Cold War was the formation of NATO, which we have just talked about. Now we'll discuss this in detail. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was a defense organization against the Russian bloc. Here, Russian bloc means Russia and the countries of Eastern Europe. The conflict between the Western and the Eastern Europe over German problems became serious. America decided to form a mutual military assistance organization with the Western countries. So, name of this organization was NATO. On April 4, 1949, America, Britain, France, Italy, Canada, Belgium, Denmark, Luxembourg, Norway, Portugal, Iceland, and the Netherlands signed the North Atlantic Treaty. Greece, Turkey, and West Germany later joined this organization. So, when NATO was formed, there were 25 countries who were its member. The signatory states agreed to regard an attack on any one of them as an attack on all of them and placed their defenses under a joint NATO command organization of North Atlantic Council. All the countries that we have just discussed now, they agreed that if any country of the Soviet bloc would attack on even one of them, it would be taken as a joint attack and jointly NATO forces would act against the Soviet bloc. The NATO was formed primarily to oppose the spread of Russian influence in Western Europe. Now, Stalin took it as a challenge and tension naturally remained high. So, formation of NATO was yet another milestone of the Cold War period. The next important event during the Cold War period was the formation of the Warsaw Pact by USSR. Soviet Russia became alarmed at the formation of the NATO. Russia strongly protested against the inclusion of West Germany into this organization. Ultimately, Russia formed a rival organization with the Eastern European countries. At the initiative of Russia, the countries like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Albania, and east part of Germany concluded the Warsaw Pact on 4th May 1955. So now, against the military act of the capitalist group, that is NATO, the USSR has formed its own group called as the Warsaw Pact. So the world was clearly divided into two groups, the capitalist and the communist. The map on your screen shows the NATO and Warsaw countries. Here with the yellow color you can see the countries which were there in the Warsaw Pact, which was started by Soviet Union. Here you can see Soviet Union itself, then Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, the eastern part of Germany. So here also one country, Albania. So these all were under the Warsaw Pact. And with the other color, with the orange color, you can see the NATO countries. These are the NATO countries: Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, United Kingdom, Norway, Denmark. So these were the major countries which were in the side of the NATO. So this shows that the world was divided between the American bloc and the Russian bloc. The next important crisis which took place during the Cold War period was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The most tense incident of entire Cold War period was the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Fidel Castro, the new ruler of Cuba, nationalized all American-owned estate and factories. Students, here nationalized means he brought all the factories and all the property under the control of the government. As all the American-owned companies and factories were nationalized now by the Cuban government, so in January 1961, America broke off all diplomatic relations with Cuba. Russia then decided to set up nuclear missile launchers in Cuba, which was very close to American coast. The two powers, namely USA and USSR, at that time were almost on the verge of a nuclear war. So it was looking like that the Cold War was going to turn as a real war. Finally, Russia decided to remove the missiles. Both sides came to their senses and tension gradually relaxed. With moving away of missiles from American border by USSR, the tension between both the countries finally ended. A telephone hotlink was introduced between Moscow and Washington for quick consultation in case of any emergency. In order to improve their relation, a telephone hotlink was started between the capital of both the countries so that their relation can be improved and the heads of the country can talk about any emergency issue. Students, here telephone hotlink is a direct telephone line in constant operational readiness so as to facilitate immediate communication. Finally, America, Soviet Russia and Britain signed a nuclear test ban treaty in July 1963 and thus agreed to carry out nuclear tests underground to avoid polluting the atmosphere anymore. So finally, the good sense prevailed and the developed countries of the world called as the USA, USSR along with England came forward and signed nuclear test ban treaty, that is NTBT, so that the pollution level can be decreased. By this treaty, they agreed that all the nuclear testing will be done only underground so that the atmospheric pollution can be reduced. The next incident which provoked the Cold War between America and USSR was the first phase of the Vietnam War. It started in 1946 and lasted till 1954. Let's first discuss what was the background of the Vietnam issue. Indochina consisted of three areas, namely Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. This area was a part of French Empire. The people of these areas fought against the French and ultimately became independent. During the Second World War, Japan again occupied the Indochina, but after the fall of Japan due to Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombardment by America, Vietnam was proclaimed a republic. Students, here republic means a type of government where the head is elected directly or indirectly by the people. Both French and Japanese were resisted by League for Vietnamese independence under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh. So, the French and the Japanese were resisted by the League for Vietnamese Independence. In short, it was called as the Vietnamese under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, who was fighting for the independence of the Vietnam. On your screen, you can see the picture of Ho Chi Minh, who was fighting for the independence of Vietnam. He was trained in the ideals of Russian communism. The Vietnamese, though led by the communists, was an alliance of different shades of people. At the end of the Second World War in 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared the whole of Vietnam as independent, but France was not willing to give Vietnam full independence as Vietnam was once a colony of the French government. Japanese has conquered the Vietnam from France during the Second World War. And according to France, since Japan had surrendered in the Second World War, so Vietnam should be handed over back to France. So they were not willing to give freedom to Vietnam. Vietnamese then started fighting against France, and this resistance continued for long 8 years. France was then defeated at Dien Bien Phu in May 1954. The Vietnamese became successful due to the massive support of the people and the constant supply of arms from the Communist China. With the help of the Chinese government, Vietnam was able to free themselves from France. France failed to send troops because of the after effects of the Second World War, which made France a weak country politically and economically. So, the first phase of the Vietnam War was a glimpse of the Cold War between the capitalist group, as France was inside of Nato, and on the other side, Vietnam was getting help from the communist China. To solve the Vietnam problem, Geneva Conference was held in 1954. According to it, Vietnam was partitioned into two parts, namely North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh's government was recognized in North Vietnam, and South Vietnam came under the western parts, mainly America. It was laid down in the Geneva Agreement that elections should be held in Vietnam in 1956 to ascertain whether the people wanted reunification of both parts of Vietnam or they don't want. But this election was never held, and gradually civil war started in Vietnam, in which North Vietnam and America got involved in long run. And why America was involved in it? Because in the Geneva Conference, the South Vietnam was under the control of America. The next incident was the second phase of the Vietnam War. Here you can see North Vietnam and South Vietnam. This was an area where American interference was more, and here with the red this color you can see the actual zone of the war where North Vietnam and South Vietnam fought with each other. The South Vietnamese government under President Ngo Dinh Diem refused to organize elections. America backed this regime and never pressed Ngo Dinh Diem for elections for the fear of communist victory. As America was afraid that if elections were held in South Vietnam, it would lead to the communist victory, so elections were never held in the South Vietnam. Very soon, the government of Ngo Dinh Diem became unpopular and the National Liberation Front, that is NLF, was formed with various opposition groups, including the former communist members of the Vietnamese. So, civil war started in South Vietnam. The NLF now demanded a democratic national coalition government which would take steps for a united Vietnam. So the National Liberation Front wanted a democratic government. Gradually, it became clear that Diem government could not tackle the situation. America then increased its military presence in South Vietnam on the plea of protecting the independence of the Vietnamese people, but the real intention was to keep the country in the non-communist bloc. As NLF wanted to embrace communist government and America was against communism, so America sent its troops in the South Vietnam so that the country could be saved from becoming a communist country. The Vietnam crisis was a big problem in the Cold War period. China and America were the principal interested parties and Moscow had maintained a caution. China and America were the two countries which were interested in Vietnam. America has directly sent her troops in South Vietnam and China was helping the North Vietnam with ammunition and China was also providing the weapons to that group in South Vietnam which wanted to bring communism in South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, who was the leader of the communist government in North Vietnam, believed that only force could unite the two halves of the country. The successive American presidents like Kennedy and Johnson stuck to the policy of interference in South Vietnam to prevent the spread of communism. Students, here communism means a system where all means of production are controlled by the government. And it was quite contrary to the capitalist system of America, which believed in privatization. So the Vietnam Civil War 1954 to 1975 was the longest fought civil war ever. Finally, ceasefire was arranged in January 1973. Students, ceasefire means declaration of peace. It was agreed that American troops would be withdrawn from Vietnam and both North and South would respect the frontiers along the 17th parallel, but still the Viet Cong continued to attack the Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, and it was ultimately occupied in 1975. At last, Vietnam became free from foreign intervention. United Vietnam came under a communist government in the same year in 1975. So, with the withdrawal of the American troops from the South Vietnam and declaration of ceasefire, finally the Vietnam problem was over and both the countries were reunited in 1975. Here you can see North Vietnam and South Vietnam and the boundary between them, which was called as the 17 parallel. This is area Laos, Thailand and Cambodia, which was called as the Indochina area. The next issue which brought the Cold War to its climax was the Berlin Wall. The situation in Berlin also created tension between the two blocs. Perhaps encouraged by lead in nuclear weapon, Khrushchev made an announcement that Russia no longer recognized the rights of Western power on West Berlin. As after America, now USSR had also become a nuclear country, so motivated by it, Khrushchev, who was the president of USSR, declared that Russia would not accept the right of the Western powers, namely America, England, and France, on the western part of Berlin. When America challenged this declaration of Russia, Khrushchev did not press the demand too far. That means Russia did not react to the opposition raised by America. But in 1961, Khrushchev again placed this demand before American President John F. Kennedy that West should withdraw from West Berlin. When Kennedy, the American president, refused to accept this demand, Berlin Wall was erected, which was a 28-mile long wall across the entire city, effectively blocking the escape route, and it was erected on August 1961. The building of the Berlin Wall in the same city of Berlin was the clear example that the American bloc and the Russian bloc was hostile to each other, and this was the period of Cold War which divided the world into two fractions, the American bloc and the Soviet bloc. Students, these are the topic we have covered in this module. We have started our discussion with the Berlin Blockade, which was done by USSR so that the Western countries like England, America and France could not enter in the eastern part of Germany. Then we have discussed the formation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was the first ever military organization of the capitalist group. To counteract it, the Soviet Russia also formed a military pact called as the Warsaw Pact with countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Albania, Yugoslavia and Poland. Then we have discussed the first phase of Vietnam War where America and China came in confrontation with each other. Then we have discussed that in Geneva Conference in 1954, it was declared that Vietnam would be two countries, the North Vietnam and the South Vietnam. In the second phase of the Vietnam War, a direct confrontation was there between China, who was supporting the North Vietnam, and the communist factor in the South Vietnam, and America was directly supporting the South Vietnam by sending its troops there. And finally, we have discussed the Berlin Wall, which was erected by Soviet Russia in 1961, which divided the city of Berlin into East and West Berlin. These are the questions we have discussed in this module. Why was the Berlin Wall erected in 1961? State one outcome of the Berlin Blockade 1948-49. Mention the event which led to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1964. What is NATO? How did NATO provide for the collective security of its members? What is the Warsaw Pact? Give one reason for Stalin's attempt to set up pro-communist governments in Eastern and Central Europe. You can see a YouTube link. You can use this link to explore more on this topic with the help of this explanation and YouTube link. You are expected to make notes of this topic. We'll meet you in next session. Till then, have a nice day.